How are we doing, folks? It's good to be here. Glad that I get to speak because I get to take my mask off. I'm going to start my 40-minute clock so that we don't run over, so that you may or may not learn something, but I will end on time. So, let's see if we can go to full screen here. All right, it falls to me to cover a whole series of topics in sequence as a kind of grand overview of what will be covered today and tomorrow. I'm grateful for the GBA. I've known Gerard for some time now, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes that goes to making this an effective forum for dissemination of useful information about the blockchain, and in particular, its interface with government decision-making. Just by way of, I guess the only commercial here is I currently serve as a partner at a venture capital firm that invests in the blockchain. And so many of you may know me as a historical relic or fossil, but I also am very active in the blockchain space today. All right. All we have to do is cover the history, the technology, the use, and the policy of blockchain, and we have 38 minutes and 17 seconds to do it. Let's start with the history. Okay. The reason that I often get called out to these sorts of events is, you meet with people and you're at these cocktail parties, meet and greets, and people say, well, I've been in the space for four or 5 years, so I'm kind of an expert. And then the guy next to him trumps him. He says, I invested in Bitcoin in 2012. And then I come along and I say, well, I've been in this space for 32 years. And that's sort of the end of the conversation. So this is a picture, of course, of my collaborator and colleague Stuart Haber and myself when we were younger and thinner and better looking, working at Bell Communications Research, Bellcore, part of the old Bell Labs system. And the reason for the juxtaposition, of course, is that when you look at the I hope this is not maybe this is just a humble brag, I apologize. But when you look at the footnotes to the Bitcoin white paper, you can see that the work that was done at Bellcore lays the core foundation for what was done with Bitcoin. And so it's a little bit from that perspective that I speak. People might find this interesting if you're a historical aficionado. This is the first patent issued as a consequence of the first paper, and this is the first illustration of linking together a sequence of blocks cryptographically secured. We didn't call it a blockchain at the time, and I think those of you that know this story know that neither did Satoshi, but in hindsight, what we were working on was a chain of blocks cryptographically secured. You can call it what you want. Obviously, a lot has happened since then, but I'm going to take you through just a couple of stories to give you what I consider the appropriate setting, and then we'll follow that with an understanding of the technology, and then through the rest of the items. So for me, the quest began while I was finishing my PhD out on the other coast, on the left coast. I actually had a joint situation at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center and at Stanford University by dint of a favor that my advisor, my dissertation advisor, called in. And so it gave me the opportunity to live in a kind of future world, those of you that know Xerox PARC's reputation. And looking at that world of the future, I started to worry or even obsess, my wife would say, about the issue of the fact that all of the world's records were going to become digital. And when that happened, there would be no way to tell the difference between an original record and a document that was altered just seconds before it came up onto your screen. And so, to the aptly defined obsession that my wife would call it, I became very worried about how we would create immutable records. Okay? Records that depended only on the bits themselves and not the medium in which they were embedded. And having the ego of a physicist, but knowing nothing about cryptography, when I first showed up at Belcore, I went down the hall and knocked on Stuart's door. He was a very widely known cryptographer. And I said, there's going to be a huge problem in a couple of years. And we should apply the advice that one of my dissertation advisors gave me. This is someone that later went on to receive a Nobel Prize out of Stanford. He said, he was a theoretical physicist, and he said, I try to stay really close to the experimentalists so that I'm the first person to hear any new results. And that way, I can start working on the problem before any of the smart people get to it. And I said to Stuart, I said, this is going to be a huge problem. We should work on this problem before the smart people, get in and steal the thunder. And so he said, okay, let's go for it. And things went well. We developed a kind of yeoman level system, but it lacked a certain elegance. And what I said to Stuart was, we've got a workable system, but the problem is it requires you to trust someone. Okay? And it would be great if we could eliminate the trust. And so Stuart agreed. Stuart, obviously being the more senior person, he said, okay, let's go for it. And it just so happened that we were working on it for a while, and finally Stuart pulls me aside and says, Scott, I don't think we can solve this problem. In fact, I think it can't be solved. And so to salvage a paper out of this, why don't we prove that this problem can't be solved? And so we were working on the proof, and after a particular day working on it, I went home. My wife, my lovely wife, who's right there, was exhausted, having dealt with our two young children, and so we decided on our budget that we would go to a middle-class restaurant, Friendly's, which is not yet bankrupt. They've been in and out of bankruptcy. At any rate, we're waiting in line at the restaurant, and I'm reviewing the proof that Stuart and I are working on. And those of you that may be a little bit more technically inclined will know that it was a sort of proof by induction where we said, look, if you've got two people and you need to make a trusted record, what if those two people collude? And well, then you need a third person looking over their shoulder. But what if they draw that third person into the collusion? Well, then you need a fourth person looking over their shoulder. And if you continue this out, ad infinitum, you realize that that's not possible, and that's why you can't remove trust from the system. And so I'm going over this, rehearsing this while we're waiting for the table, and I said, yeah, it would be like the entire world in on the collusion. And it was at that point that I realized that that, in fact, was the solution to the problem, not a statement of why it couldn't be done. And the trusted party becomes effectively everyone in the world as a joint witness. This was a singular moment in my life. There's a story told among physicists of a gentleman named Hans Bethe, who was one of the OGs of quantum mechanics and whatnot in the 30s. And one day he figured out the actual process, he figured out for the first time the actual process that led to the thermonuclear fusion in stars. Okay? That night he goes out on a date, and his date at one point in the evening is looking up at the night sky and says, oh, look at the stars, how beautiful they are. And he goes, yes, and I'm the only person in the world that knows how they work. And for one brief shining moment, that was how I felt, okay? I turned to my wife and I said, I think I just figured out something important. The reason I say I think is, you have to understand, I was an amateur when it came to cryptography. Stuart was the adult in the room. And so I needed to check with him the next morning that we had, in fact, done this. But I was up the entire night telling my wife, I think I figured out something important. She did not sleep well and does not have the same happy memory about it that I do. But to me, I considered it a true shot heard round the world, because no longer did we have to trust a central authority. And even one individual could stand up for the truth and have the gravity of what's right on their side. It allowed us to hold a collective power that had never been possible before. And it was a good day. It was a good day. I hope each of you have had a good day recently, but this was a good day for me. I'm going to skip the analogy with the inverse panopticon just in the interest of time, but let's go to the technology. How does it work? Now, I know that many of you are well versed in this, but there may be others that kind of got into the dialogue a while back and missed their chance to ask the dumb questions, and now they feel like it's too late because they get listed as a panelist or an expert on the topic, and so now they can't ask the dumb questions. But if that's you, just listen in. So the essence of the technology is a thing we call a one-way hash function. It allows you to take an arbitrary document, one, for example, that begins with within the course of human events. It goes on, it's longer. And create a kind of fingerprint, a numeric digital fingerprint of the record. And it has some very unique properties, okay? One, it is unique to the document. Two, it discloses no information about the contents of the document. In other words, to use a technical term, you cannot take the hash value and reverse engineer the document. But any change to the document, even of one character, will totally change the fingerprint. Okay? Now, how can we make a use of this concept? Well, what we do is we first observe that hash values themselves are documents, and so we can append two hash values together to create a new document, in quotes, and that leads to another hash value, and they can be connected one after another after another. They can be grouped in blocks and then connected as time evolves. This chain cannot be tampered without detection. But it doesn't stop there, because what's crucial is that each party to the system gains their own individual copy of what at the time we would have called the blockchain backbone. Okay? And they therefore can serve as an independent witness of truth. Okay? That's the receipt they get. And they have an incentive to hold on to their receipt to prove what they want, and yet that creates a collective effect, a kind of Adam Smithian invisible hand of the marketplace, that the disalignment of people's interests creates this collective benefit that makes it exceedingly difficult to tamper. While we're talking about technology, I know a lot of people maybe have trouble making the leap from blockchain to Bitcoin, or what I would have called the Proto Blockchain that Stuart and I worked on. And there are four things that characterize that distinction. The first was to give the blockchain a sort of payload, okay? Make it a distributed ledger, something that, for, again, the history buffs, is explicitly called out in the third of the three papers that Stuart and I wrote. Second, to make it about money. With all due respect, it's said that the way to get attention is to write about either money or sex. And so That, in a sense, is what made Bitcoin explosive. It added an additional level of peer-to-peer. Namely, in the original model, everyone was watching the blocks being created, but the blocks were created at the same server, each consecutive block. And so Satoshi also made it so that the witnesses also became creators of blocks. And then the incentive of mining, which has both good and ill associated with it. This is kind of a Peter Parker moment with mining. What about Ethereum? People ask about that, which in a sense you can think of as one of the next major evolutions. Ethereum took the concept of distributed record and suggested that it should also become a widely distributed computer so that it was able to execute so-called smart contracts. Now, smart contracts, again, there's nothing to be too intimidated by. You have a kind of smart contract already working with your smartphone, namely Verizon or T-Mobile or whoever, has a little program at their server that says, when it gets to the first of the month, bill this person for an unreasonable amount of money. And it executes automatically. But when we use smart contracts, Ian Grigg and others being the creators of these contracts, when we use smart contract in the context of the blockchain, what we're talking about is it's not running at the company's server and you're the puny consumer who has no control, but it's running at simultaneously nobody's server and everybody's server. And that's what elevates it to a decentralized smart contract. And for good or ill, there are fees associated with that. I won't go into that. But it doesn't end there. The innovation continues in sort of alpha numerical order. Some of the various innovators, I've just selected 7 amongst hundreds that I could have talked about, that are continuously working to make it work better, faster, more secure, less harmful. The list goes on and on. That kind of covers our, what did we do? History, technology. Now it's time for use. But before we go there, just one more thing, okay? You know, hopefully a way that Steve Jobs would feel good about. We're going to actually build a blockchain right this instant. And every single one of your smartphones is about to become a node on an actual real blockchain that you will receive a copy of the immutable record on. So, what you want to do is go to immutablerecord.com. You'll see the landing page is the same as the first slide that I created there. And at immutablerecord.com, you'll see something that looks, just give me a second. Immutablerecord.com, you'll see a tab that says Create a Blockchain. And so you want to do that. And when you click on that link, you will go to a website. And it ought to look roughly like this. Is there anyone that has made it to the website and sees a screen that's kind of like this? Okay. All right. First, don't touch anything yet. Okay? Because I have to first create a Genesis block. Why do I get to create the Genesis block and not you? Just because I do. I get to create them. Humor me, okay? So we're going to go in. We're going to click down here at the bottom. Don't you do this yet. You know who I'm talking about. Okay. And you'll see there's a blockchain that we're going to create called GBA 927-2021. All right. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a Genesis block. Use a pen name. This is going to be public information, so I mean, you could use your real name, but you don't have to. Mark Twain is already taken, so pick something different. You may, Say again? Not yet. I'm just giving you the instruction. This is a training session, right? Okay? I'm showing you how to do it, but don't do it yet. Okay? You can put a fake email address if you wish, but if you put a real email address, it will not be disclosed, and you will receive a copy of the blockchain. Okay? All right. And then you have the opportunity to make a prediction. We're going to make this a collective market prediction style blockchain. Okay? And I'm going to make a prediction not about the price of Bitcoin or the next election, but I'm going to say that America will endure and prevail for another 100 years. Yes, I am one of those kinds of people. This is my We the People tie. I am that guy. Okay, so I've made this prediction. I've created the Genesis block, and now you are able to engage. You want to choose, I have a code, or I know what I'm doing, and then open it up, and it should create a screen that looks somewhat like this. And by clicking on this button up here, you can start to make your entry appended to this in the blockchain. Is anyone getting that to work? I just want to get...
We join it first, right?
Yeah, you join, what does it say? Yeah, you choose, I know what I'm doing, you join the blockchain that says GBA, it's already pre-populated, okay? And I hope people are seeing a screen where you can have a PIN name and then your email. Yes, give me just a little feedback. Yeah, you're going to do an entry there. The blockchain is empty because you haven't made it yet. Okay, are people able to populate those? Okay, just want to make sure it's working. Okay, and we've already got a second entry in. You can see them form here. Scott, Randall, Iki. Now, only 3 entries are in. When we get the 4th, that's the block size, and so the first block will be built. Watch it happen. Wait for it. It's coming. Oh, I should go to full screen, shouldn't I? Oops, that didn't work. What do I need here? How do I get full screen? I'm sorry. Somebody help me out here. I'm left. I know where the left is. Yes. Okay. All right. So what's happened is we've got enough entries that the first block was formed, this so-called Merkle tree, for those of you who are familiar with. Then we got 4 more entries, so we were able to link the first block to the second to the third. And notice what's happening down here. Each time a new block is formed, I get sent a copy of the blockchain backbone. And so do you. Okay? That's what makes you a node. That's what makes you a holder of a copy of the blockchain. Okay? I've also got a receipt, which shows how my original document links up to the blockchain backbone. Remember, this was the Proto Blockchain. This is how it was built originally. And yeah, okay, so we've got plenty going on, and we've got 27 people in, and at this point I'm going to request validation. This goes to the notion of a consensus mechanism, I'm sure you'll recognize, but this is how it worked old school. Okay? I ask for validation. 3 of you get selected at random. Randall, Don Kedick, and that was really a clever pen name, Don. No one's going to guess what your real name is. And Gandalf. Okay, that's appropriate. Okay, the 3 of you, Don has already done it. Don, where are you?
Maybe he's remote. He's remote.
He could be remote. Okay. I guess it's too late for him to remain anonymous. So, each has validated. Okay. Now, what did that mean? It means they got sent a copy of my receipt. Okay. They compared it to their own copy of the blockchain. It came back true. It's validated. Okay. And again, these people are chosen, for those of you that are technical, using a pseudo-random generator where the seed itself is the most recent link in the blockchain. So all of the records contribute to the choice, but no human can consciously influence the choice. Okay, so we get a suitable subset, a representative subset. and they all come back validated, and you'll see that Randall earns a surety credit. This is, again, the early days. We didn't call them tokens. We didn't do any mining. Validation was all that was done. But notice also that I could go back to my original submission and change it if I were feeling pessimistic. America will endure and prevail for another, I could change this to another year or two. Okay? But if I request validation, again, a totally new set of people are chosen to validate. Okay? Kathy, JD. But what happens? The validation fails. Okay? There's no way to pull one over on the entire world. That's the leverage of the blockchain. Okay? So anyway, that gives you your technical demo. Let's go on and let's go back to the talk. Yes?
For that last one, if the 3 people validated their change of record entry, would that have gone through?
It's not possible for them to validate.
Can you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. If the 3 people had validated my change, would that have been considered acceptable? And the answer is, I suppose, but notice that those people are, my son just sent me a text, how is it going? Great, but a little busy right now. Okay. The point is, these people are selected in such large numbers and in a truly randomized way that it would take an enormous conspiracy to get them all to agree that the change was valid. And I'm happy to talk about that more afterwards if you want to buttonhole me. Let's go on to use. Now, there are many, many use cases. What was it that worked? Can you find that little green? Yes. Say again? Oh, I've got to switch to this. I'm sorry. You present. Okay, let's talk about use. There are many, many use cases. Let's just look at the time. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time. But I'm only going to focus on one. Okay? No, I am not going to talk about NFTs. I know everybody wants to hear which NFT they should. No. Don't. Okay? I want to talk about something because we are right next to the seat of power for the United States of America about something that is going to deeply affect our future as a nation. And that is the use case of central bank digital currencies. Now, again, some of you that know well this space would say, well, all central bank digital currencies are not necessarily even blockchains. But the relevance is very strong. And the reason for it is this, and it's captured in these 2 quotes from Jamie Dimon, 2017 Jamie Dimon, and Jamie Dimon, 2021 Jamie Dimon. Now, to be clear, if Jamie is listening in, okay, Jamie is a very smart person, okay? This is not a disparagement slide, but it is evidence of just how fast things are changing. You have the CEO of JP Morgan dismissing Bitcoin as a scam. It won't end well. It's a fraud. I'd fire my people if they traded in Bitcoin. To now, you look at the company newsletter for for JP Morgan Chase. Yes, they just keep getting bigger. Okay. He said fintech, that's a euphemism for decentralized finance, quite frankly, because he just doesn't want to totally admit that he was like missing it for whatever, okay, is an enormous competitive threat to banks, okay? And the same thing holds for fiat nation-state currencies, okay? Things have changed, okay? And for those of you that are policy wonks, I'd love to send you a section of a paper that I wrote on at the request of a European Union advisory body about this new competitive landscape. But let me just go on. Here's another before and after. okay? Does anybody remember Facebook's Libra cryptocurrency 3 years ago? They go in for congressional hearings, and basically you have people saying, we would be crazy to give you folks a chance to experiment with people's bank accounts. It is delusional to think individuals would trust the social media company with their hard-earned money. Don't let the door hit you on your way out. Now, where are we? This spring, now there's a concern that China's CBDC is gaining a competitive edge on the United States efforts. And so some spokesperson from the SEC comes in and says, yes, there's tremendous growth in CBDCs, but the reason we're not behind China is we may effectively end up partnering with stablecoin providers. That'll be our competitive edge. Wait a minute. Facebook, Libra was a stablecoin. So, gee, the bad guys have suddenly become the potential good guys. Did you want to make...
I have a question. In your opinion, why do you think Facebook's Libra was shut down by the government?
Well, let's not say shut down, because it's been reborn as Diem, and they are working in a far less public glare with regulators and Congress to see a new version of it move forward. So, and I'm happy to talk afterwards about that. But we are down to 8 minutes and 40 seconds. Okay? So, it's almost like 3 years ago we kicked you out, and now it's sort of like, hey, Facebook, remember all the good times we had? How about if we, And the point is, even though CBDCs may not necessarily be blockchain-based, though some of them are, and I think all of them will eventually will be, the way to retain control or influence in the world is going to largely come down to the alliances and partnerships that are built with other entities, including cryptocurrencies, particularly potentially stablecoins. And so what began as a response to the threat of cryptocurrency is effectively going to validate it and ensure that it becomes part of the ecosystem. There's a lot more I could say about use, but we're going to, as I said, you may or may not learn something, but we're going to end on time. Let's talk about policy. This is a serious issue, as far as I'm concerned. Gerard made his case, and I want to say that in broad strokes, I fully endorse what he's talking about. Obviously, blockchain is kind of near and dear to my heart. I don't mean for a moment to suggest that Stuart and I figured it all out 30 years ago, because that's obviously not the case. It's an evolutionary process. There's huge amounts of innovation that have occurred. I've already cited some of it, and it's just ongoing. But it is kind of close to me, because you feel like you did play a role in the early days, and you want to see, your baby grow up and thrive. Let's jump in. First, I want to speak to those who are potentially justifiably critical about the shortcomings of this or that blockchain-based application or cryptocurrency, okay? Because there are many. But I had a friend in the Army that taught me a great story about mortars. I assume the relevance is obvious. Well, maybe I'll just clarify a little bit why it's obvious. He says, a mortar is a very crude instrument, okay? The first time someone fires a mortar shell at you, it falls laughably short. The second mortar shell falls comfortably behind you. And the third mortar shell, you're dead. Don't confuse the early birth pangs of a technology for its eventual potential, okay? There's a substantial amount of coverage, negatively inclined, about blockchain and related technologies, and much of it based on actual fact. But don't miss the forest for the trees, to switch the metaphor. A lot of these things are being worked out. I talked about Bitcoin, I talked about Ethereum, and then I talked about a whole host of innovators to follow. Okay? Just because something was a flaw of a particular earlier stage version doesn't mean that it is an inherent flaw of the blockchain concept. Okay? I'm going to skip this, but I hope these slides are available to you, and my general feeling is, since we're not going to have time for Q&A, any of you are welcome to just reach out to me on LinkedIn, and if you have a particular follow-up question you want handled. I also do a monthly AMA that you're welcome to come into if you've got more questions. So I'm just going to skip over this. Think about the printing press. Okay? You know, I really think that at a policy level, the most apt analogy for the blockchain is to think about the printing press, the invention of movable type. This, of course, is a replica of Gutenberg's printing press. It was a hugely disruptive innovation for reasons that I think everyone here is quite familiar with. It was also considered a deep, potentially mortal threat to government. Okay? And yet, it didn't turn out that way. Okay? In fact, it enabled a new type of government structure. Okay? And the blockchain's transparency and peer-to-peer nature, in effect, is an echo of the whole notion of freedom of the press, which was made possible by the invention of the press. Okay? Technology leads to new social structures. And by the way, what building are we in anyway? Okay? I hope that in less than 100 years, we may well have another building here in the, within throwing distance of the National Mall that celebrates the fundamentally new social structures that were made possible by the blockchain. I'm going to end, last slide. Think about what the Constitution is. Okay? This is something I posted as a tweet the day before Thanksgiving, I think, last year, recognizing the true OGs of decentralized algorithmic consensus mechanisms, namely the authors of the Constitution. Okay? Again, we think of the Constitution as an old thing now, but when it was first created, it was obviously new. And new in what sense? New in the sense that it suggested that it was possible to create a government structure that does not rely on centralized authority and might makes right, but rather a peer-to-peer system, talking about voting, set forth in a document to run algorithmically, okay, and whose consensus outcome we would all accept. Okay? Sorry. If there is any country on the face of the earth that ought to embrace blockchain, it is the United States of America. I'm not suggesting that there's a one-to-one analogy, but the overlap between the impetus to individual freedom and liberty and the notion of a decentralized, transparent, peer-to-peer consensus is unavoidable. Let freedom ring. And we have, by my watch, we have 36 seconds left. Any questions?
What do you think about like decentralized stablecoins?
Again, it would take an hour to discuss, but I think it's a movement in the right direction. CBDCs give the Federal Reserve the chance to have more and greater beneficial levers of monetary policy, okay? But they're going to exist in a competitive environment. They have to make their case on value because there will be alternatives. I think that's all we've got, but thank you very much.
Okay.